Here we go. All right, Dr. Tracy Boyd, I'm so
All right,
excited for
Brian,
you
go
to
ahead.
be here. Tell me about your career. How did it start? And uh, tell me everything, how you're from your humbling beginnings to now.
Yeah. So, first of all, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right, perfect. So I am a resident and citizen of Jackson, Tennessee. I moved from Jackson in 2012 when I graduated from Northside High School, and I decided to go to Tennessee State University, where I also cheered and I worked in the president's office. And at the time, I was studying social work, and I always knew that I was a people's person. I always knew that I was this public servant kind of individual. So I knew that I always wanted to be in some type of public service work, whether that was in the role of a social worker, whether that was in the role of a social justice advocate or a criminal justice advocate or whatever. I saw myself working for the public in general. And so around graduate, moving on from my undergrad, well, I actually transferred from Tennessee State in my third year of undergrad, and I started attending a online college called National Paralegal College. This is really where my interest in law came in. You know, I was interested in being a paralegal. I was interested in working for a law firm and working for different criminal defense attorneys and even other judges, whether they were general session judges or criminal court judges. I saw myself working inside of the courtroom or the law firm. And so I started working in my final year in undergrad. I started working for the law office of Courtney Teasley out of Nashville, Tennessee. And that's really where my fire that's the area or the time that this fire was kind of struck in me to really be an advocate and really fight for those people who were unjustly incarcerated or maliciously incarcerated, or even just incarcerated because of this thing that we call systemic racism, which is so embedded into the DNA of our criminal justice system. And so man, I have to, long story short, to kind of make this much shorter, started working for Courtney. I was her paralegal for 2 years. But here is, at the time, what I would have considered to be a downfall. But as I have become an adult, and looking back on those situations, I realized that it was something that I needed to go through. And so around this time, I was working on my master's now. I was incarcerated. I was incarcerated for 6 months due to a simple possession of marijuana. There were some liberties taken away from me that kind of hindered my defense and the things that I looked at as being possible defenses for me. But this DA, this district attorney, this assistant district attorney really wanted to prove a point, which is what a lot of district attorneys do to Black and Brown, Indigenous people of color that come into the criminal justice system. They like to prove points with these individuals by making sure, that they're incarcerated, by making sure that their liberties and their freedom has been taken away from them. And so went through that experience. But while I was incarcerated 6 months, Brian, I had the opportunity to meet so many amazing people who a lot of people in society would just throw off to the side. I was able to meet so many other inmates that was in this jail. I was able to write motions for them and get them back into court. There were some people who have literally, and this is without exaggeration, there are some people who were in jail literally over a year and had not even been to court on their initial charge. And so I saw this as an opportunity to really start educating people about the legal system and how you need to be involved and in the know of your legal rights and responsibilities. Got out of there 6 months later. I met with the at the time, well, not at this time, but he is the former attorney general under President George W. Bush administration. I met with Alberto Gonzalez. Alberto Gonzalez not only served as our attorney general under George Bush administration, but he also served as a Supreme Court judge in the state of Texas. He also was the Secretary of State for the state of Texas, and he now serves as the Dean of Belmont College of Law. And so I was able to meet him. I was able to sit down in his office and tell him what my plans were, which was I have just founded what I like to call an adolescent law school, a law school for children. So children who are in middle and high school, in addition to working with them in those core academic subjects, reading, math, science, history, all of that, we take this in-depth study of the American criminal justice system. So a lot of the things that myself and even practicing attorneys in a courtroom grappled with in law school, these are some of the things that even our young people are starting to understand and starting to grapple with for an understanding. And so it's been amazing. I am back in my hometown, Jackson. The school, going back to the school was actually launched in Nashville, Tennessee in 2019. And here we are in Jackson, Tennessee, here in 2021, where we have expanded this program. And I just really think that it's important. I think it's imperative for young people to know what their legal rights and responsibilities are, given this climate of America that we're in.
All right, let's transition to, there's been a lot made of the African-American athletes making political statements at events, sporting events. What are your thoughts on that?
I absolutely love it. I absolutely think that it's necessary. When you say sporting events, the first thing that I could think about is Colin Kaepernick, of course, when he took the knee on a football field. From there, it started a movement. It started something. It started creating an awareness for people about this injustice within our system. And when I say our system, I'm talking about a number of systems. I'm not just talking about the criminal justice system. I'm not just talking about the education system. I'm talking about all of these systems that when we wake up in the morning, Brian, a lot of us are depending upon those systems. So yeah, I'm talking about the education. Yes, I'm talking about criminal justice. I'm talking about affordable housing. These systems that we depend on so much, in actuality, they were set up with people that didn't have people who look like you and myself in mind. The public school system, we see grassroots organizations, and this is not an insult to those advocates in public education, but we see so many grassroots organizations and individuals fighting for public education. Public education was never set up for Black people. That system was never set up for people who look like me and you. So when Brown v. Board of Education, when it was passed or when it was fulfilled, in reality, it wasn't fulfilled. Because even today, we see and we find ourselves still fighting in a system that was never set up for us. So going back to your sporting event, question, I think that it's important. I absolutely agree with it because it's creating awareness for people, and it's a sense of protest. I say all the time, Brian, and I know we're going to move on. I say all the time, whenever your protests begin to make people feel comfortable, the very people you're protesting against feel comfortable, your protest is ineffective. And so I truly believe that a lot of young people and even adults who are protesting at events, they're making statements, they're creating awareness, and people are really paying attention to it because, as you have seen, people have stopped attending sporting events, people have stopped watching sporting events. And then there are some people who still watch them regardless of the political association with it.
All right. Some people, and I'm kind of like in this boat. I feel like, do you think that we as Black people or the Black community puts too much pressure on athletes to solve maybe the problems we have in the Black community?
Um, I don't know if the Black community puts. I don't know if it's right to say that they put a lot of. Repeat that for me, Brian.
Do we put like, do you think that athletes have a lot of pressure on them to, for example, protest, for example, change laws, do a lot of stuff for the Black community? Do you think they have a lot of pressure on them?
In my opinion, no. In my opinion, no. I don't think that we have a lot of pressure to do this stuff at like sporting events and you know all of that. I'm thinking. I think what the issue is with the Black community is that we look at sports as a way out, or we think that putting Tim and Man in football, that that's going to be the thing that saves them. I disagree with that. I disagree with that wholeheartedly, for a number of reasons. One, as you see this Black Lives Matter movement inside the sports arena, if I'm making sense, inside the sports arena, it's not going so good. Black people are still pushed off to the side. They're still chastised. They're still called out, because of the things that they're fighting for and that they believe in. We do put a lot of pressure on young Black men to join sports leagues. Um, I disagree with that. I don't believe that sports leagues with an S is going to save our young people. I think being very intentional about what we are wanting, identifying what we're wanting, and also being intentional about creating action steps and strategic steps towards what we want. I think that's what's truly going to save us. I'm going to always revert back to education because I'm a founder of a school, I'm a teacher, and I truly, wholeheartedly believe that in order to get to the next level in your life, in society, in your movement, in your being, in your identity, you one have to know who you are truly, and two, you also have to be educated about all of these systems that we're a part of. Identifying what part of the system you want to fight. Brian, this last thing, and I'll give it back over to you. One of the things that I also always say on my movement or in this movement is it's hard to see the forest for the trees. It's sometimes hard to see the big picture when you have so many smaller things in front of you blocking your vision. It's so hard to understand a moment in history when you're actually in that moment. We are currently in a moment of history right now. And for a lot of people that look like us, we don't know that. We don't understand that because we have so many things that are clouding our vision and we can't pay attention or give enough attention to each and every one of those things.
All right. What can people do to help in the Black Lives Matter movement? Like, if someone came up to you on the street and asked you that, what would you tell them?
I would tell them to identify what it is that they are comfortable fighting for. There are some things that I fight for, Brian, that you may not be comfortable fighting for. There may be some things, Brian, that I fight for that you may not necessarily agree with or agree to, and that is okay. I want people to understand that it is okay to disagree. What I would tell people to do is ascertain what area of this system you want to fight in and you fight for, and you dedicate yourself to that. Me, I am a Juris Doctor. I attended law school. I'm not a practicing attorney, though. I don't practice in the courts. I know that the things that I want to do and the things that I want to accomplish, I will never be able to satisfy that and to successfully become what I'm interested in wanting to become, practicing in the courts. Because in that system, again, we're talking about a system that is embedded with systemic racism. There is no possible way that I will be able to call out the district attorney's office or a corrupt judge and still expect my client to be able to fight for his rights and his liberties. Those judges are going to hold it against me. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So I don't have an interest in practicing in the courts. My goal and my job, Brian, is I want to be able to position myself, and it may be something crazy to think about, but I truly want to position myself in a way that prevents people from ever having to step a foot in a courtroom. If I can be your educator, whether that's in the school or the community, I call myself a street lawyer because I educate the street about their legal rights and responsibilities without ever having to cross that line of the practice of law. I teach the law, and there's a difference between teaching the law and practicing the law. And so I love teaching people about what their legal rights and responsibilities are. And I hope that a lot of people will start becoming civically engaged, politically mature, criminal justice minded. And again, so those are the things that I would kind of put out there to people, is become educated about this system or these systems that we're fighting against. Know how the criminal justice system is one big system made up of 30,000 microsystems. And that's including law enforcement. That's including the judiciary. That's including your DA's office. That's including state, federal, and local police officers and law enforcement. There are about 30,000 microsystems that make up this criminal justice system that I have dedicated my life and my fight for. And so I want people to start identifying what it is exactly they want to fight for and stick to it, man.
All right. What laws would you like to see passed?
I would like to see quite a few laws, just to kind of name a few. The cash bail. I would like to see Tennessee do away with the cash bail law. There's a lot of people who are currently sitting in jail, incarcerated right now, simply because they cannot afford a bond. The law it's very clear on bonds. Your Eighth Amendment right is very clear on excessive bonds. A judge is to set a reasonable bond, and bonds are not set as a punishment tool or as a tool for punishment. Bonds are set to ensure that the offender will appear and show back up to court when it's time for them to show up. So regardless of the offense, that's not why a bond is set for you. I want to make sure that you show back up to court. That's why judges issue a bond. So I would like to see a change in our cash bail system where we completely do away with it in totality. Another law that I would possibly like to see stricken down is the felony murder rule. And a lot of people, young people that look like me and you, are convicted off of this felony murder rule because in a court of law, you don't have to prove intent. Brian, if you called me and said, Tracy, let's go rob Billy John down the street. And let's say I knew that you wanted to rob Billy John, But let's say you wanted to do more than rob Billy John. You was gonna rob him, then kill him. I knew nothing about the killing part. I just knew that we were going to rob this man. If this, if you go and rob this man, and let's say he pulled out a gun and he shot and killed you, I would be held responsible for your murder. Not the man that shot you, not anybody else. I would be responsible for your murder because the felony murder rule says in the commission of a dangerous felony, if anybody dies, anybody that's associated with it can be held liable for the murder. So I didn't even know that you had any intent to go down here and kill this man. And this man killed you because we went and murdered him. I mean, we went and robbed him. That man would not be held liable for your murder. I would be held liable for your murder. Your friend who went down the street with you would be held liable for killing you. And the intent was never there. I never intended to kill you. I never even knew that you had a gun. I never intended for this to escalate to the point that it did. I am deemed liable for your murder. So that's another law that I would like to see repealed.
All right, I thought of one more question. There's a lot about police. What would you like to see done with the police brutality?
I wouldn't like to see anything with police brutality.
Yeah,
I
what
would
I mean,
definitely.
I'm talking about like, there's a lot like, what do you mean? What would you like to see in terms of law changes?
Yeah, I would definitely. I don't think that 6 months in a police academy is worth a lifelong career in law enforcement. I do understand that there may be some small continuing education things that they have to do by the year, but I don't believe a police officer going to the police academy for 6 months is enough to make them aware of the law. They are law enforcement. So that means they enforce the law. There are a lot of police officers who do not know the law, and you don't learn it within 6 months. It took me 4 years of law school, plus undergrad and my master's and things like that, to understand constitutional law. A lot of police officers overstep their boundaries. And because the Black community, and let's just call a spade, Brian, because the Black community is ignorant to what their legal rights and responsibilities are, you're going to continue seeing us being falsely arrested. You're going to continue seeing us being unjustly incarcerated. And you're going to see us really signing plea bargains for the rest of our life because we have this mindset, I don't want to sit in jail. I can't sit in jail and lose my job and lose my family and lose my house. So I'm going to sign this plea bargain and accept this agreement, even though I did not do the crime. I'm going to accept this plea bargain because I need to get home to my children. And that's what we see every day in this criminal justice system. I know I kind of got off. Let me go back to your police officer. I would like to see funds allocated from local police departments into other community programs. When we started this hashtag defund the police, yes, it was a radical statement. It was radical because people who love their blue lives, they made it radical. They made it and wanted it to be something that it was not. Defund the police did not and does not mean get rid of the police. It does not mean take out and abolish your local law enforcement. What it means is look at their budget and you take a portion of their funding and you allocate it to other community programs for them to respond to the things that police officers should not be responding to. A police officer should not be responding to an individual that's having a mental health crisis in the middle of the street. And this is in our criminal justice system, Brian. A lot of times we confuse mental health with criminality. We need licensed social workers. We need licensed mental health counselors who went to school years, not months, who went to school years to study psychologically the psychology of the brain in mental health, period. Those are the people that should be answering to such calls, substance abuse calls, mental health causes, and things like that. So many times, last thing, so again, and I this is just a reiteration, so many times we have confused mental health and criminality. And we don't have time for law enforcement officers to continue confusing the two.
Well, I made me think of another question.
You good? I got time now.
Some people will say, because how can you want to allocate resources and at the same time have law enforcement be trained more? How can that coexist?
Dr. Martin Luther King said, your budget is a moral document. All of this defund the police is to their budget. We're actually taking away, when I say training, that police officers need a little bit more training, I'm talking about educational training. You don't hear about, you hear about lawyers having to take courses in constitutional law. Because when they go into a courtroom to defend their client, they're defending their constitutional rights. A police officer don't take courses in constitutional law. A police officer never picked up a constitutional law book, whether it was an introduction to constitutional law or an advanced constitutional law course. A police officer never picks up a constitution book, study it, and is able to know what people's legal rights and responsibilities are. Funding should be provided to police officers for continuing education and training purposes. But when I say that they shouldn't be responding to certain calls, that's the point of stripping their budget. You stripped and you reallocate the funding that they were receiving to go to those particular calls. You take that funding away and you take them having to respond to those calls. You take all of that away. Re-examining the purpose of law enforcement. A lot of law enforcement officers, they make their job, or they take their jobs too personal. Your job is to enforce the law. It's not your job to go looking for problems in situations to involve yourself in. Your job is to sit there and wait for a call, not to go around searching for calls. And so again, it brings us to that point again where police officers still are a little uneducated about the criminal justice system, man. These are law enforcement officers that has never taken any type of American legal class, any type of criminal justice class, unless they are a police officer who is in school part-time and they're studying criminal justice and things like that. But that's not the case for a lot of people, Brian. The reality for a lot of police officers is they're in their career. When I graduate high school, I can go to this academy for 6 months and become a police officer. That's not enough to me. You have to become a little bit more educated about this system that you're a part of.